Welcome to the Author Corner, our chance to meet the authors you'll want to read. I'm Stephanie, and I'm so delighted tonight to be joined by local Long Island author Dina Santorelli. Thank you so much for coming.
Oh, thank you for having me.
And a stack of books. Look
sure.
at this. I love stacks of books.
Hopefully it'll be higher next time I see you.
Okay, you can come on again and we'll have a higher stack of books. Oh, these are pretty fat. Don't sell yourself short. Before we get into the books, how did you get into writing?
Oh gosh, I've been writing short stories since I'm a little girl, like 6 years old. I used to write. I found recently some stories I wrote on construction paper with crayon and pen.
Thanks, Mom, for saving those. I love that.
And what's really interesting about those stories is that they're kind of scary. It's things like, Mommy's not home, I don't know where Daddy is, I hear someone coming up the stairs, like very suspenseful type fiction, which is interesting because that's what I write now. So I've always had that bug to write fiction that was suspenseful, like thriller-like.
Okay, if I found my 6-year-old with something like that, construction paper, I'd be a little freaked out. Was Mom worried? Or?
I don't know if Mom saw, to be honest with you. It was a different time, and nowadays I think I know everything my kids do, but back then, we were like hanging from the ceiling. They had no idea.
Wow.
But it would, ended up being a career.
They send you off to somebody if you
That's
write stuff
true.
like that.
Thank goodness that she didn't find out.
And you wouldn't be here on the show.
But what's interesting is when I didn't think, even at that young age, in my teen years, I didn't think I was that good enough of a writer to write fiction. And I ended up going to and joining my local high school newspaper in high school. And I thought that really suited me, journalism. I thought it was sort of like these quick sentences, the who, what, where, when, why, and how, and just get to the point and no description. And so I ended up majoring in journalism in college. And the fiction writing, the thriller writing, became something that was just on the back burners of my life for a while. And so for like 10, 15 years, I was a local journalist, and then I worked in the trades, and then I started writing for consumer magazines and started working on nonfiction books. But I never forgot that dream that I had to write fiction and to write thriller fiction. And over the years, I had been collecting these like story ideas that I would write at the time, like on little pieces of paper, and just hide them throughout the house, which led to eventually just writing
emails
your
husband
to myself.
Want to call somebody.
Like, please. And then finally, I was just at a point where I thought I had a successful journalism career. I had 3 beautiful children, a happy marriage, and I thought, I think I want to write fiction. I think I want to just throw exactly. And so I ended up going back to get my graduate degree at Hofstra University.
I love that.
And with the sole purpose of just starting up that fiction career. Not really. It wasn't even about the degree. It was just about to be around it, about the literature. And that's what happened. And so my final semester, I took a long fiction class, and I started writing what became Baby Grand.
Oh, love that.
And the rest is history.
I love, besides the writing, that you did something for you.
Yeah.
I love that.
It was,
after marriage and children and all of these trappings of success, you said, you know what? I have to honor me and my dream.
I just never forgot. It's funny. I remember announcing it to my family during a family barbecue right before I went back to school, and I remember my mother-in-law sitting there and looking at me saying, what? Your life, at the time I was 37, and she said, but your life is set. What are you doing? And I thought, no, there's more. And what's interesting is she has become probably my biggest cheerleader since that time. So
shout out to mother-in-law.
Yeah, she's awesome.
Oh, I'm so thrilled. Well, I'm thrilled that, thrilled that you went back. So while you were there, your last semester, you wrote this entire thing?
No, I would say maybe the first third.
Okay.
And then I graduated from college, and at the time I was working on nonfiction books.
Okay.
And I was working very closely with a literary agent for that project. And so after that project was over, I thought to myself, I knew she handled some fiction, and I thought, maybe I'll just approach her and just let her know, hey,
no, it's
did
funny.
You know that I
know
write
nothing
fiction?
About your nonfiction books. We're not talking about what those are about.
And so I approached her, and I think she liked working with me, and I think she wanted to maybe humor me, and thought, okay, you can send me like the first third of your novel. I'll read it. And she ended up liking it. And so that's when she signed me. And at that point, I thought, geez, I have to finish this book at this point.
You have to. You got a contract.
So within 6 months, the book was finished.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So that
now,
was exciting.
it's a trilogy. We have Baby Grand, baby Bellino?
Bailino.
And baby
And
Carter.
baby Carter, yeah.
Now, it's a trilogy. Did you know when you started it was going to be a trilogy?
Absolutely not. I thought it was going to
Really?
be one and done. I thought I was going to, and I knew exactly how I wanted to end Baby Grand.
Okay.
I knew this sentence.
Really?
And so I thought, oh, this is going to be great. I'm going to do this and move on to these other little ideas that I have on the pieces of paper throughout my house.
Right.
And so I started writing the end of the book, and I thought, I started to see how the story could continue. And I thought, I think this is going to be maybe at least a sequel, but
Right.
maybe a series. And so I thought, no, it'll just be one more book. And then the same thing happened at the end of Baby Bailino. I thought, oh, there's one more book in the story, and so I decided to make it a trilogy.
Are we done with this?
No, I
book
think
now?
we're done. I think we're done. I have told book clubs that I have been thinking about maybe a prequel.
Oh, I
down
like
the
a
line,
prequel.
down the line.
I like that.
Yeah. So, but for now, I think we're done.
As a person who has read it, I want to hear a little backstory.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
like that.
So, I don't know. We'll see.
Is there something other than the Baby Grand trilogy in the works right now? Then a totally different story.
Yes. When I finished Baby Grand, as I mentioned, it was going to be one and done.
One
It was
and
going to
done,
be a standalone novel. So I had started writing a book called In the Red.
Okay.
And I struggled a bit with that book, and I think it's because I was in the midst of thinking about continuing the series.
Yes.
And so once I finished, it took me 4 years to write In the Red.
Wow.
And
this
so
was 6 months, and that was 4
about a
years.
year and a half
Okay.
total, and a year and a half for each of them.
Okay.
But for some reason, In the Red was like 4 years, and I think it's like I said because I was still in Baby Grand land as I was trying to write this book.
Right.
So I finished writing it in 2014, and I thought, okay, I'm going to publish it. And my oldest son said to me, who was a big Harry Potter fan, said, "What are you doing? You can't publish another book, and if you're thinking of writing a sequel or a series, you can't publish another book. And in the middle of that." Would J.K. Rowling do that? And I thought, oh, she wouldn't. So
we must listen.
yeah, I put In the Red aside, and I decided to write Baby Bailino and then Baby Carter.
Wow.
Yeah, so once those were done, Baby Carter was published last year.
Okay.
I went back to In the Red, which I hadn't looked at for about 5 years. And I did a thorough edit, and it'll be published very soon.
Oh, I can't wait to read it.
Yeah, yeah, it's
Oh, how
exciting. It's different.
exciting.
It's different.
How exciting. Now, you mentioned when you started Baby Grand that you knew exactly how it was going to end,
Yes.
right down to the last sentence.
Yes.
But while you were writing it, did you know where everything was going, or was there anything surprising? The characters surprise you?
Yeah, it's very hazy. I mean, I knew exactly, I think of it as like a roadmap. I'm here at point A and I need to get to point B.
Okay.
So, but there are so many different ways to get to
Okay.
point B. So yeah, along the way, I was often surprised by the direction that the characters were taking me. I know it sounds weird to people who don't write that, obviously I am the author of these books, but there is some point, it is a beautiful thing where the characters sort of guide me, they sort of take over.
I love that.
And yeah, so there's a lot of, this is a mob thriller trilogy, so there's a lot of mob talk in this series, and I think it surprised a lot of the people that know me because I don't normally talk, like a lot of expletives and things like that, a lot of profanity, and there is some of that in the books, but that's just something that, I don't know, the characters just kind of speak through me, and then it ends up on the page.
Yeah,
So,
well,
yeah.
I know actors who love to play a villain because playing a nice guy is kind of dull. Did you kind of feel that way when you were writing about something that you're not in the mob, at least?
Yeah.
Maybe not.
No. No, for me, you're not supposed to play favorites, but the villain of the series is my favorite character in the series. His name is Don Bailino. And I intentionally, it's funny, at the time when I'm trying to think of when I was starting to write Baby Grand or right before that, I was a big fan of The Sopranos.
Ah.
And what I loved about The Sopranos is I would be watching it one week and I would think, this guy's not so bad. He's just misunderstood. He's really, at heart, he's a nice guy.
Right.
And then the next week, he would do something so heinous and I think, oh my God, what was I thinking? He's awful. So I wanted to write a character like that, a character who had that Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde aspects about him. And I hope I was successful because when I go to book clubs and we talk about the books, there's always half the book club who wants to marry Don Bailino and the other half of the book club that is disgusted by the people who want to marry him.
Right.
Yeah, so it's so So that's what I was going for. I didn't necessarily base the character on Tony Soprano, but it was the idea of that black and white and creating
a gray.
I
love that multi-dimensional.
Yeah.
You know, who wants to read about a character that's all bad or all good?
Right, you know, about the guy with the mustache and he's tying the damsel, you know, onto the train tracks. You know, I didn't want to do something like that. I wanted something with, like you said, more dimension.
Now, I love that you're going to book clubs, and that must give you a real insight into what people are thinking. Did anyone ever say anything in a book club that was surprising? Like you're like, wow, I didn't realize that was that connection. Or
yeah,
something?
all the time.
Really?
All the time. And what I love most about book clubs is I'll be there, and clearly I wrote the books and they invited me, but there'll be this dialogue going back and forth where someone will say, I think the author meant this, and someone will say, no, I think she meant this. And I'm just watching, and because I feel like the people, the readers have taken the characters to heart. And they've really, and sometimes, I mean, at the end of Baby Carter, I did get I wouldn't call it hate email, but it was, you know, people were a little distressed at some of the decisions I had made as the author.
Right.
But and what that tells me is people were passionate
They
about
were
the books.
invested.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So yeah, so there's a lot of that, and
Wonderful.
yeah, sometimes people say at book clubs they'll tell me something that I didn't know, or
Really?
maybe something I hadn't thought about as I was writing, and I think, you know, that's right, that's true. I hadn't thought of that. I'm trying to think of something offhand, and I can't think of anything.
That's wild.
Yeah.
To think that you're the author and they're pointing things out to you.
Or maybe they'll say, one time a woman said to me, oh, that would have never happened in the book. And I thought, really? And I thought to myself, is she right? Would that have never, I hadn't even thought about it. And so I'll give you the example. There's a scene where one of the characters is very drunk and goes to visit his father, who was on death row. And the person at the book club said they would have never allowed that person to visit so-and-so on death row because he was inebriated. And I thought, really? They would not?
They would stop him? Yeah.
I didn't think so. So turns out her brother worked at Rikers or wherever.
Really?
And so she ended up texting him in the middle of the book club and asking him. And so sure enough, 20 minutes later, he texts back and says, oh, sure, they'd let him in.
Really?
Yeah, so it turns out I was correct, but in the end, she got the text and thought, I don't believe it anyway. So even though it was true, she was like, it didn't work for me. So I was like, you know what, that's fine. That was her take on it.
Wow. Now, since the books have a lot to do with things that are not in your regular life, is there a lot of research that goes into them?
You know, it's funny because I've spent so much time as a journalist. I do constant research all the time. So when it came time to do fiction, I really don't do any.
Oh,
not really. I mean, I do what I call spot research, where if I'm writing, and I get to a point where, for instance, I'm trying to describe what that death row visitation room looks like.
Right.
I might do a quick Google of
to find out.
Yeah, just to see what's out there, and then I create my own. No,
I've
never. I've never. But you know, I'll do like a quick Google search and see what's out there, and then I'll create one in my head. But I have done some traveling. For instance, in March of 2018, I traveled to Washington, D.C. Because the plot moves from New York to Washington in the third book.
Okay.
So I wanted to just get a feel for the place. I visited a few landmarks.
Nice.
Yeah, just so I was familiar with it. But for the most part, I just write from my imagination.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love that. Now, do you have like a favorite desk? Do you play music? Computer or a pen? What's your best writing?
I play no music.
No music.
What's interesting is when I edit and when I work on nonfiction, the music can play, but for some reason when I'm writing fiction, I need silence. Or I need like just white noise. Like I often write at Panera Bread.
Okay.
I wrote most of Baby Bailino at Panera Bread, actually.
Did you really?
Yeah,
Ah.
yeah. Like I had my booth, and it got to the point where I would walk in and somebody would be sitting in my booth, and I'd be like, the nerve. And what's
so
funny,
if I look in Panera and there's a person by themselves at a booth,
that's
it could be a great
probably
novel
me.
coming out.
Yeah.
I'll get them on the show.
So yeah, so I don't really have a process. Like I said, no music.
But
I
getting
try
out
to
of the
write
house. Interesting.
Every now and then. Like for the first book, I wrote it at night.
Okay.
I would set my alarm for 2 o'clock in the morning.
Really?
Yeah, my kids were young at this point, and I would just slither downstairs to my computer and just.
Oh my gosh.
And then after a couple of hours, I would just slither back upstairs and wake up with the kids and get them ready for school.
That's dedication.
And for some reason, for the second book, that didn't work for me. I ended up going to Panera Bread during the day and writing it there.
The kids were probably in school by then.
Yeah, they were older, and it was a little easier. And then for Baby Carter, my daughter had just left for college, and so I ended up moving into her bedroom to finish that book. So I had a different space for all 3 books.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, and the red was all over the place.
Okay, but no music, computer, not a pen.
No, I'm always, I can't believe that people still
People
write
do
longhand
write with
like on yellow legal pads. I mean, that amazes me.
I know. I'm constantly blown away when somebody says
Yeah,
that.
I mean, I've ever since, when I was in college as an undergrad and I got my first typewriter, I was like, woohoo, I don't have to ever go near a legal pad ever again.
Right,
Yeah.
right. No, you're right there with it. And now, do you just write on Word, or do you have any favorite programs? Because everyone's going to want to know, like, how does she do it?
No, I am very boring. I write on Microsoft Word.
Boring stuff. Yeah.
On my nonfiction side, I have worked in Google Docs because a lot of people like Google Docs, but I don't. For some reason, I'm so used to working in Word that it seems like a foreign place to me. A lot of times I copy and paste and move to Word, and then I work, and then I go back. Don't tell anybody.
I'm glad you said you like comfort. And
Yeah.
I think that's something that a lot of people need to find is where you're going to be comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's different for everybody.
It is different.
Right.
And sometimes finding that key, maybe this would have never gotten written if you stayed in Google Docs.
You never know.
You never know. You'd be there and you'd be like, this is not working.
I know. I'll never be a writer. All I have to do is move over to Word, and I'm like, woo, this is great.
Here I go. So now that you are a fiction thriller writer,
Yay, finally.
what's been the most surprising thing about being a fiction thriller? Like something shocking you didn't expect?
I think, and I don't know if it's just about being a fiction writer, how wonderful it is when people really get what you're trying to do. When you first get those comments about your stories, oh my gosh, I stayed up all night reading this, or I was, that character you created was so real to me, reminded me of my mother, those kinds of things. It's just so gratifying, and I think, because there is, especially for when people are writing their first book, when I was up at 2 o'clock in the morning, there are moments, a lot of moments every day where you're thinking, what am I doing? Is anybody going to care? I'm taking time away from my kids, from my husband, from my sleep. To do this, and is it worth it? And there's always that voice. One of my professors at Hofstra used to call it this bird that sits on your shoulder that says, you're never going to be good enough. You'll never do it. And you just have to sort of silence it, and just, if it's something that you want, just plow forward and just believe. And that's what I did. And so, like I said, when people start coming to me and saying, I love this trilogy, or I love these characters, it's just a wonderful feeling. And I didn't realize, I guess, how wonderful it would be. Because I think, and I don't know if other authors feel this way, but, I wrote these books really for me. I wrote stories that I thought were interesting, and I created characters that made me laugh or made me scared, hoping that others would feel the same way.
Right.
And so when they did, it was like, yay. So that was nice.
I bet that was nice to get that affirmation, and especially if you went into it and you did it for you.
I did. It was this dream that I had ever since I was a little girl, and in the beginning, like I said, I didn't know if I was good enough.
Right.
But I worked. Over the course of my career, I became a better writer. And what's really funny is I talk about this a lot. As a journalist, I picked up a lot of skills that really lend themselves to fiction writing. Right. I first of all, I traveled the country and the world as a journalist, and I met all kinds of people. I listened to all kinds of dialects and accents. I learned how to walk into a room, and in the beginning I was writing about, as a journalist, I was writing about lighting and area rugs. I was working in the trades.
Right.
But the funny thing is I started observing, how is that area rug made? Why does that light look that way? I started getting very descriptive in my writing, which is something I was lacking, I think, earlier on.
Right.
So being a journalist in a lot of ways taught me how to be a better fiction writer.
Has anything happened since the books came out that made you think, maybe someone at a book club or something, that made you think, gosh, I wish I could change that? Or are you happy? Are you...
Oh, you mean change the text in some way? It's funny, it's difficult for me to reread Baby Grand because I think I would go in, I'd want to go in and do some editing.
Right.
I do, but it is what it is, and I love the story.
It's a fabulous book.
Yeah, oh.
Absolutely fabulous, but I wasn't sure if you sit there and, people are talking, you're like, oh, I could have done that.
No, luckily I'm happy with the way the story evolved. And what's interesting is I made some big decisions in the last one, and at the end I sort of was making this decision on how to end it, and I went in a certain direction, and I'm very happy with it, despite some of the, hate emails that I've gotten from readers. I'm happy with, I'm satisfied.
You're satisfied.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Because, sometimes people, afterwards, when people say things, you look back and say, I don't know. Should I or shouldn't I have? But you plowed ahead.
Yeah, I was happy with all my decisions in the end.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, me too.
I'm really
Because that
glad.
is a worry.
You need to be able to sleep at night. I
know.
hope you're sleepy right now. Well, the next book, is it done enough that you can sleep at night?
It's done. It's coming out very soon, and right now I'm sort of at that last proofread stage.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Now, since that one is up to the last proofread stage, then the next question is, what's next?
I already know. I'm changing gears slightly, and I'm doing a science fiction thriller.
Really?
Yeah, I had a dream recently that sparked the idea for this book, and I'm going to start writing it in the next week or so.
Wow, a science fiction thriller. Now, what do you read in your spare time? Have you started to read science fiction, and that's why you wanted to write it, or?
I try to be very diverse in what I read.
Okay.
I do, back when I was working in the city, when I worked in Manhattan in the 90s, like 20 years ago, I was reading a lot of thrillers. I was reading like John Grisham and Michael Crichton and James Patterson. And I still read them, but I think since in that time I've just gotten, my reading selections have become diverse, where I just finished reading Big Little Lies, and next I'm moving on to a memoir, and then I try to mix it up and throw in a thriller, or I'll throw in something else.
Right.
Yeah, just to make me a better reader and a better writer. I think it's good for me to just read all different kinds of genre.
Well, Stephen King says if you want to write, you have to read.
Exactly, and that's very true.
And I love that you're reading a variety of things, because many people just keep it narrow.
Yeah, no, I like to keep it interesting. And I think that's why I started writing in the red after Baby Grand, because I thought, I read that way. I jump around, maybe I'll try writing that way.
Right.
And I think that was a mistake.
Okay.
Because I was still caught up in Baby Grand land before, as I was writing
Baby
in the red.
Grand land, I love that.
But in the end, it worked out fine.
It worked out fine, and that one's in edits, and now science fiction.
I know. And I say to people, because some of the readers that have read these have said to me, I don't really read science fiction, and my answer is always like, well, if you like my writing and you like my storytelling, I think you'll like it.
Right.
Yeah, because I'm the same writer. I'm
You're
just
the same
moving to a
writer.
different, right.
Exactly. Now, do you have a favorite science fiction author that you were reading that kind of lit a fire and made you
No, it's actually not a big genre that I read. I don't know if like The Hunger Games is considered science fiction in a way, but maybe it's more dystopian.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had this dream, and I thought it was very exciting, and I just committed to it.
Wow.
So I'm sort of just jumping in, kind of like, holding my nose and closing my eyes.
Wow. Most of us don't even remember our dreams when we wake up. You write books about them.
I know. I have paper next to my bed,
Do
my
you?
nightstand. Oh yeah. But I also have my I used to not keep my phone near my bed because, I'm on it so much during the day, I don't want to be near it at night.
Right.
But I realized that when I try to write things in the middle of the night that I dream, I can't read it the next day. So I'm better off typing it.
Oh.
Yeah, so that's why I keep my phone.
In the middle of the night, you can type
I
that
grab
little?
from my phone, yeah. And then I just put it back.
You could
in.
dictate to me.
That's true. Yeah, I didn't want to wake up my husband.
Yeah, you'll be saying to the phone, and then he grabbed her throat.
I'll be like,
What's going on?
yeah, so.
Now, is there a genre that you think you would never write in?
I've gotten to that age where I
never
say
say
never.
Never say never.
Never.
You might be writing, romance at one point.
I was going to say romance was a genre that never really attracted me, but there is quite a bit of romance in the red, and I did get an idea for a romance story that I will tackle down the line.
Now I'm dying to read it.
Yeah, so we'll see.
I tend to read romance when I'm on vacation, just because that's my vacation genre.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just a little
something light.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Thrillers, or I'm working. Romance is like I'm on the plane.
Right, exactly. So we'll see. I don't know if it suits me, but you never know.
Okay.
I might be really good at it. Who knows?
I think you'd be really good at it. I honestly think you'd be really good at it. Children's books, for scary children's books, is that a thing?
I've written a children's book. I just never
you?
did anything with it. Yeah.
Is it scary?
It's lurking. No, not at all. It's very sweet.
What's under the bed?
No. Rainbows, unicorns. It's very, very sweet.
Oh God, now I want to
Yeah.
see that.
Yeah,
I
I
can't-
just, it's in my computer. I haven't done anything with it. Maybe one day.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
And here I thought you'd be like, never, never, never.
No, you never know. You know, like I said, I never say
Wow.
never.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Now, how about some advice for future writers? Because I know there's so many people who have a book inside them, and they're waking up from a dream, and they're writing on
Yeah.
a pad, and what do they do to start?
I always say to new writers, you have to just first of all believe in yourself, because there's going to be so many people, including yourself, they're going to tell you that you can't do it. And so
Get a good mother-in-law.
exactly. So believe in yourself, but also be open to criticism.
That's hard.
Yeah, you know, let
And
people
those two
read
things
your
are a
works.
little bit.
Yeah, I know, but it's so important. You know, you have to believe in yourself enough to write the work, but you have to listen to what other people think to make it better. I think because Baby Grand went through the traditional publishing process in the early stages
Right.
with an editor and input from, with an agent and input from editors at publishing companies, it became a better book.
Yes.
And so
And you
it's-
were open to listening to their input.
Exactly, and that doesn't mean that you have to make every change that is suggested to you.
Right.
But think it through. I think of it as like parenting. You know, when I had my kids, people were throwing all kinds of advice at me,
Oh,
and I
don't
decided what and I decided what made sense to me and what didn't. And it's
Right.
the same thing with writing. Yeah.
So believe in yourself.
And just be open to criticism, but don't be, a slave to it.
And wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and
If that's
drag
if that's your
yourself down.
process, then that's what you got to do.
Well, I love that you have to have a process. You have to have
Yeah.
you have to commit to it.
Yeah.
And that was something that you definitely did, is you committed to wanting to do this.
Oh, sure. But I was also open to the idea that that process could change. You know, it wasn't
Right.
writing at 2 in the morning for book 2. It wasn't writing at Panera for book 3. It was different.
Right.
So you kind of go with the flow, but
But you
always
found
pushing.
something that worked.
Yeah.
And you just said, I'm doing this. And most importantly, in all of those scenarios, you prioritized it.
You
know,
have
you
to.
have a house full of kids.
You have to.
And a career and a husband, but you made it a priority.
Yeah, if you don't, it won't get done. It just won't. And I think I find a lot of people don't make it a priority, and that's why they always say to me, "How did you do this?" And I did just that. When I do my to-do list for the day, it's write Baby Grand, go to the supermarket,
Right.
do my freelance work. It's on my to-do list.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, like you said, when you started by committing to going back to school and such, and not everyone has to go back to school.
Not
but,
at all,
But
not at all.
you said, a few years from now, I'm going to have a pile of books. And someone else a few years from now is just a few years older. We're all getting older.
Exactly.
Just embrace
I
it.
completely agree with you.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh my gosh.
And
Thank you.
please read the Baby Grand Trilogy and the new books that are coming out. They're wonderful. And thanks for joining us on the Author Corner.
We're just books up on a shelf. Try to understand this if you